Next section is 11.3. This one again is a ton of definitions. This one is specifically about collecting data. So this is why you would collect it, how you would collect it, what you have when you collect it, everything about that. So there's a 5-step process that everyone runs their way through. When they run their way through that 5-step process, this is how they get from start to finish about it. Okay, so step number 1 is specifically what is the topic they're studying. So why are they studying? What are they doing? What is the study? So that's step 1. Step 2, they then have to choose a sample. Now that sample has to be representative of the population that they want. So, like, I wouldn't be able to ask, all right, I want to know about the elderly in Frankenmuth, and then I go talk to my juniors. I wouldn't be able to do that because that's not representative of the sample. If I wanted to talk to, or if I wanted to figure out stuff about the elderly population of Frankenmuth, and I went to Independence Village, and then I started asking people around there, sure, then that's going to be a good sample of a population so that I could actually get some answers that I want. Okay? Step 3 is all about collecting data. That's what this chapter is specifically about. So collect data. Number 4 is organize that data. And then step 5 is all about interpreting it. Okay? So you're going to kind of see where this chapter is going. We're on collect the data. Then we're going to talk about organizing the data, and then we're going to talk about interpreting that data once we actually get to that point. Alright? So you're going to notice that this is kind of the steps that we've already followed. We've already kind of talked about these two things, how we choose a sample, what a sample actually is, but now, actually I guess we haven't really talked too much about a sample, so that kind of comes in this chapter, or this section right here. So these are just different ways that we can kind of talk about it. But you can kind of see the process of this stuff. It's pretty self-explanatory. You come up with an idea, you choose people to ask, you ask those people and get the information, you organize it, and then you figure out what they were trying to say to you. Okay? So, the next part, these are the different types of samples that you can collect. Okay? So, the best way to represent something, the best way to represent a sample, and there are a whole bunch of ways to do this, but by far the best way to do this is by random. You just choose people that fit your sample size. Like if I want to ask people, juniors, about what they think about this online schooling, I would just choose randomly everybody, because then I'm not going to get, the all A kids. I'm not going to get all the kids who don't do anything. I'm not going to get all the kids who hate this. I'm not going to get all the kids who love this. I'm going to get a very good mix of everything. So random is the best way to go. Okay? But that's obviously not always possible. So there's one called self-selected, and self-selected is all on a volunteer basis. So that would be you guys volunteering to me information. Self-selected means you choose yourself to come talk to me, and it helps. Okay? The next one is called systematic. And all of this, by the way, is on page 610. All of these definitions, big words, word for word, is all here. I'm telling you the word for word definitions, but I'm writing down the shorthand one. So systematic is a rule is created. So that would be like me saying, okay, all right, I want to ask juniors, but I'm only going to ask people whose last name starts with A through C. So I've created a rule. I'm only asking people A through C. Those are the people. That's my rule. I'm following that rule. So I've created a rule. That's my system. Okay? So those are the two types of things. Okay? Now we kind of break into a little bit different thing. We break into something a little bit different. So the one this is where things kind of start to get a little bit more complex. So there's a really good graphic on page 610 where it actually kind of shows you what this looks like. But we have something called a stratified sample. So this is a stratified sample. Now what a stratified sample is, it's a population that's divided into smaller groups that share similar characteristics. So then the people are chosen from those random groups. So basically we're taking this stratified example and we're breaking people into 3 groups that share kind of similar characteristics, and then we're choosing randomly to create my random sample from those groups. So I've broken people into groups that share a similar characteristic, and then I'm taking random people from those groups, and it's kind of just making a random sample. Okay, and then there's kind of a follow-up to that one. There's one called a cluster, and the cluster kind of does the same thing, where it breaks people into groups that look like this. There are 3 groups, but then it just chooses one of the groups. It doesn't go randomly through the groups, it just says, okay, I want that group. So that one is a cluster sample, where I'm just choosing this one. I broke them into 3 groups, I'm just going to choose that one. Okay? Very last one is convenience. And convenience is exactly what it sounds like. It's easy to reach. So that would be me. Okay, I'm in my classroom, want to know about juniors, so I ask everybody who comes into my class. It's convenient. I don't have to go anywhere. They don't have to go anywhere. I don't have to go out of my way. They don't have to go out of their way. Convenience just means that it's easy to reach for everybody. Super easy. Okay? If you look at page 611, there are some really good examples on those. I'll read through them with you. I'm not going to write them down because it's really hard for me to write all this stuff on this crappy iPad. But it is what it is. So for instance, you list all of the students alphabetically and choose every 6th student. In that one, obviously you've created a rule. You're choosing every 6th student, so that is going to be a systematic. You mail questionnaires out and you use the questionnaires that are returned. Have you guys ever gotten something in the mail and then filled it out and then send it back? If the answer is yes, then you're a volunteer. You've volunteered your information. If your answer is no, then you're not volunteering. So you mailing questionnaires back, that's self-selected. If I ask all of the students in my algebra class, like I just said, that's convenience. If I randomly select 2 people from each classroom, so in this one, think about it. If I randomly select 2 students from each classroom, all of these are broken down into subsets already. Each classroom is technically a subset. Then I'm choosing people from that subset, so that's going to be a stratified sample. Okay? So that's what you have to be able to solve from that stuff, or that's what you have to be able to come up with from that stuff. Okay? This next part is stuff that you guys are probably all pretty familiar with anyway because of politics. The next thing is called unbiased and biased groups. So unbiased means that the population is accurately represented. So the population is accurately represented through something. Okay, that means that there aren't. So I mean, if we use politics as an example, I hate doing this, but if we use politics as an example, and I want to figure out who people are going to vote for, then if I go to a Trump rally and I want to get a good representation of the entire United States, if I'm at a Trump rally and I say, hey, who are you voting for? I'm not going to get anybody who's going to vote Democrat. Everybody who's at a Trump rally is going to vote for Trump. So that's going to be a very biased sample. If I want an unbiased sample, I would just randomly walk around places, and I would ask people and say, hey, who are you voting for? Who are you voting for? Who are you voting for? And then I would get a random population. That would be an unbiased thing, where it accurately represents an entire population. So we already know that a biased set is something where it either over or under represents the population. So if we look at this, it either over or under represents the population. So obviously if I ask people at a Trump rally, they're going to over-represent the population in the way that they say they're voting for Trump, and they're going to under-represent the population for the way that they say they're not going to vote Democrat, right? So it's just biased versus unbiased. Biased means that it's very, very heavily influenced in one way or the other. So one thing, one thing that's very good in the book is it says a computer science teacher wants to know how students at a school most often access the internet. The teacher asks students in one of the computer science classes, and it wants to know what kind of sample this is and whether it's biased or not. So he wants to know how students at school most often access the internet, and then he asks people in his computer class. So first it's convenience because they're in his class, which is really nice, but second, he wants to know if those kids go on the internet. And he's asking those kids if they go on the internet in a class where they're required to go on the internet. So every one of them is going to answer yes because it's a requirement of the class that they're on the computer and they go on the internet. So obviously this is biased because the kids already use the internet. So if they're asked if they use the internet, they're going to answer yes. He's not actually accurately representing the population there. All right? So there's a couple different ways where we can collect data. So this is the collecting data part. That was choosing the people. Now we're talking about collecting data. If we're collecting data, there's 4 different ways that you can collect data. One is through an experiment. So when we have an experiment, that basically just means that you introduce a variable, and you also will have like a control group. So you're going to see how one group responds without a variable, and you're going to see how one group responds with a variable, and then you're going to talk about what happens. Okay? So that's, like if I wanted to lose weight and I started taking a weight loss pill, they would have something where they would give me the weight loss pill and they wouldn't give someone else the weight loss pill, and then we'd do the same diet, same exercise, and then see what happens. Because they've introduced a variable to me and they didn't introduce the variable to the other person, and now we can kind of see the comparison. The next one is an observation. That's just where you sit back and you watch, see what happens. So you just don't introduce anything. You don't introduce anything at all, you don't change any variables, you don't really do much, you just watch. You just see what happens. And if you watch and see what happens, it's pretty easy to kind of tell what's going on, right? So if I wanted to see how many juniors actually pick trash up off the hallway floor, I could just sit back and watch and count. I could see what happens with that. The next one is a survey. This one's pretty self-explanatory too. They send questions out, you answer the questions. And then finally the last one, this is a simulation. A simulation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my desired situation. So I'm going to create a situation that I want to see stuff about. Okay? So like, for instance, we do this every single time we have a fire drill, right? We're creating the atmosphere that we have a fire and we're seeing how people leave. So we're creating a simulation that a fire is happening. Once you create the simulation that the fire is happening, you get out. We're observing the fact that you do that. Okay? So that's what a simulation looks like. Again, on page 613, very, very good examples of that stuff. Like, for instance, a landscaper fertilizes 20 lawns with regular fertilizer mix and 20 lawns with a new organic fertilizer. The landscaper then compares the lawns after 10 weeks and determines which one is better. So one had 20 normal fertilizers and one had the new fertilizer, and then he compared them, right? He's experimenting. He's introducing a variable to one, and he has a control group in the other one. Okay? So that's really what you're looking at with that thing. Okay? There's also a very good... there's a very good spot on, this is still biased, so it's really not something that I'm going to write down, but if you look on page 613, there's a question, or a thing that it says about biased questions. Now, if I'm asking a survey, I want to make sure that all of my questions are fair and they're not biased. So, like, for instance, one of the things says, a dentist surveys his patients by asking, do you brush your teeth at least twice per day and floss every day? If a dentist asks me that, I'm saying yes every time. Right? Or at least I'm going to feel pressured that I have to say yes, and if I don't say yes, he's going to yell at me. Right? So if you think about that, if you go to a dentist and they ask you a question, you're going to feel pressured to answer that question. That's a biased question. That's not a fair question. Right? So just kind of think about that. Should be pretty straightforward at this point. This video took a little longer than I wanted it to, but it's all definitions. Okay, the last two sections have been all definitions. Just understand what each of them are. If you have a really hard time with this, all of these examples are in the book, and they have great pictures that go along with it. So pull up the pictures for the book, go along with it, see if anything makes sense, see if it doesn't make sense. Ask me questions if things don't make sense so that we can talk about it. Again, short, abbreviated version. If you have questions, please make sure that you let me know so that way I can get them straightened up. Alright? Alrighty. I think, 3 more sections? 11.4, 11.5, and 11.6. We are almost done, folks. Hang in there. So, we're almost done. We're getting there. You guys are doing it. Alright. We'll see you in a bit.